We will talk about collective security today. As you know, security is a very important concept in international relations because all the nation states at all times they have sought security for themselves. So the concept of security, whether national security or international security, has always been very important in the study of international relations. So collective security, therefore, is one of the major areas in the study of international relations. Now, what is collective security? As you know, as the term suggests, collective security means here the concern for security is not only the concern of a single nation. Here, the security of each and every nation would be a collective concern. That means one for all and all for one is the watchword of collective security. I repeat, one for all and all for one is the watchword of collective security. That means here no country is left alone as far as security is concerned. I give some examples. Suppose a country A, it is suffering from a security concern, and suppose it is thinking that it may be attacked by country B. In that case, country A is not alone. C, D, E, F, G, H, I, all these countries, they will come together to safeguard the security of country A. So that is the ideal of collective security. That means it is very helpful. Why collective security? It is very helpful for weaker states. A weak state, when it is feeling threatened by a stronger state in terms of power, its security concern, the security concern of the weak state is no longer the concern of its own. It is the concern of all others. Now, collective security, it has been put into, it was first officially, it was adopted by the League of Nations system. As we know, the League of Nations, which was established in 1919, in Article 16 of the Covenant of the League of Nations, adopted collective security. That means members of the League, if any member of the League is attacked by other state, the security concern of that member would be a collective concern, not of that member alone. In the study of international relations, scholars like Hans G. Morgenthau and later other scholars, they dealt exclusively with this concept, the concept of collective security. So, the ideal of collective security operates best when three conditions are fulfilled. Number one, the collective security system must have more strength than the potential aggressor. First, the security system must have more strength than the potential aggressor. That means when, suppose, potential aggressor is country A and country A is confronted in the collective security system by others, the others here, B, C, D, E, F, they must have more strength than A in this example. Number two, nations defending the system must have the same conception of security which they are supposed to defend. In simple words, nations fighting the aggressor, they must have the same idea of security. They must have the same idea of security which they are trying to defend. And number three, those nations must be willing to subordinate their conflicting political interests to defend the system. The nations which are trying to defend the collective security must surrender their political interests in order to defend the security, the collective security. That is the ideal scenario of collective security. Now, the collective security would be like this, the security system. If nation A is attacked by nation B, so here B is the aggressor because B is attacking A, the ideal scenario would suggest that other nations C, D, E, F, G, H, they will come in support of nation A, which has been attacked by nation B. I will give concrete examples later on, which will help things easy, which will help you to understand the system more easily. So the aggressor must be repulsed by all other nations collectively. That is the ideal of collective security. I go back to my earlier examples. If nation A is attacked by nation B, so we identify B as the aggressor. All other nations C, D, E, F, G, H, I, they will come in support of nation A and try to prevent nation B from further aggression. So it was first adopted by the League of Nations, although we must remember in this context that the concern of security is theoretically it was first elaborated by Immanuel Kant in the 18th century. So the concern of security in international relations is nothing new. Kant elaborated it, and Kant in his seminal work on international peace, Kant always talked about confederation of states defending peace. So that system has been adopted again by the League of Nations in the form of collective security. Now, the ideal of collective security is very one of the most important ideals as far as the concept of security goes. It is no doubt very useful. As far as the theoretical side of collective security is concerned, it is very useful for the weaker states. In international relations, we have seen that the weaker states sometimes find it very difficult to defend themselves. And no one actually helps any weaker state in the international system. That is why the League of Nations, when it became a world organization during the interwar periods, First World War and Second World War, during the interwar periods, the League of Nations tried to defend the weaker states through this system, the system of collective security. Later on, after the Second World War, when the United Nations was established, the United Nations Organization, UNO, it also adopted the collective security provisions in its charter, which is the constitution of the UNO. Chapter 7 of the UN Charter elaborately provided for collective security. So, collective security has always been adopted by world organizations like the League of Nations and later on by the United Nations Organization. So I talked about the theoretical side of the collective security. Again, in very simple words, if a weak state is attacked, say by a strong state, other states will try to defend the weak states. This is, in simple words, the theoretical side of collective security. Now, let us come to the realistic side of collective security. The question is it really possible? Is it really possible to maintain collective security always? According to Morgenthau, in reality, the system is severely tested and sometimes the system fails to operate. It would be like this. Suppose again, nation A is attacked by nation B. I gave this example. And the ideal of collective security would say that C, D, E, F, G, H, I, J, all other nations would come to the help of nation A, which has been attacked. But in reality, in world politics, this is not as simple as we put it theoretically. In world politics, what would happen? Some nations, say in our example, C, D, E, and F, they will support nation A, while others, say G, H, I, J, they will support nation B, and still others like L, M, and M, nations L and M, they will remain neutral. The question is why? Why League of Nations, or despite the charter provisions of UNO, why this happens? Here, national interest comes into fore, because every nation has separate interests, and its national interest sometimes would deter it from supporting the attacked, that is the weaker nation. I give concrete examples. Now I give concrete examples from world politics. In the 1950 Korean crisis, South Korea, North Korea attacked South Korea clearly. So North Korea was the aggressor in this case, and South Korea was attacked by North Korea. Now the ideals of collective security would say that all other nations would come to help South Korea, which has been attacked by North Korea. Fine, but what happened in the Korean crisis, which is a very significant event in international politics at that point of time, and it is still being studied, the Korean crisis. Now what happened? The ideals of collective security was not strictly maintained, because in the Korean crisis, when North Korea attacked South Korea, all other nations, the ideal would suggest that all other nations would help South Korea. But what happened in reality? In reality, USA, United States of America, it started helping South Korea, and sometimes it pressed the UNO to help South Korea. Now, considering UNO as a world body, UN efforts to help South Korea would have surely proved fruit, would have surely materialized in preventing the aggression of North Korea. But that did not happen. That means North Korea was not repulsed. Why? Because China, an emerging power, joined the war in support of North Korea. China, which was a communist country at that point of time, it was a declared socialist nation, it came to help another socialist country, quote unquote, declared socialist country, North Korea, in the Korean crisis. And the scenario took a very worst turn. Despite American efforts to support South Korea, despite American and UN effort to support South Korea, China, which was a big power, which was militarily big, China openly supported North Korea. So the scenario became like this: China plus North Korea, South Korea plus USA, and many other nations within the UN system, they remained neutral. So what I said, that in reality, a scenario would be like this: some nations would support the attacked who has been attacked. Some other nations would come in support of the attacker, the aggressor, and some other nations will remain neutral. Now the Korean crisis would have been solved very easily had China not intervened in the Korean crisis. But China willingly and actively intervened in the war, and China helped North Korea, and that turned the scenario to a very tricky and intriguing situation. I mean, the scenario became very intriguing because the collective security concept never really took off. The collective security concept actually failed during the Korean crisis. So, as far as the critics would argue that when nation states are trying to pursue their own national interests, when they have their separate conflicting interests, national interests are sometimes conflicting. Suppose nation A is pursuing one type of interest for its own survival in world politics, nation B is pursuing another kind of interest for its survival in world politics. And we have seen that nations, their national interests are mostly conflicting, sometimes due to economic interest, due to other interests, their interests may converge. But as far as security is concerned, national interests are seen to be conflicting. There are many examples in the world we can give that the conflicting interests continue to antagonize nations. India, Pakistan, closer home, is one example. Palestine, Israel is another example. North Korea, South Korea is another example. Conflicting national interests in terms of security, they lead nations to adopt adversarial or antagonistic positions. So, critics would argue that the collective security system, although theoretically, ideally it is great, but in reality, the collective security system, it is very difficult for the system to operate, to remain operative for a long time. Even before the Korean War, when the League of Nations was the only world organization, I mean the leading world organization, the League of Nations also failed to prevent a similar type of a situation when Italy attacked Ethiopia. The same scenario happened. Some supported Italy, some others supported Ethiopia, and many others remained neutral. In fact, League of Nations failed due to conflicting interests of a divergent set of nations. I repeat, the League of Nations failed due to conflicting interests of a divergent set of nations. They could not come into peaceful terms. They had different interests, and that is why the world body actually failed in its functions. And from that mistake, the UN system, the United Nations system, tried to learn, and it adopted, as you know, a system of great power unanimity, where 5 great nations were given permanent status at the UN, which we call P5. 5 great powers have been given permanent position at the UN Security Council, so that the world security, international security, could be maintained effectively. But as we have seen, the UN system also could not maintain the collective security very effectively. I gave example from the Korean War, from the Korean crisis, where the collective security failed to take off. So later on, collective security, it remained a practice in theory, and moreover in the study of international relations, but in realpolitik, collective security never really took off. It was never really successful. So security, the question is, can a nation's security be maintained collectively? That is a big question. And that is why every nation tries to maintain its security by maximizing its armaments. So, in order to prevent arms race, in order to prevent arms race and the tendency to procure more and more arms by each and every nation. In order to prevent that tendency, these world bodies like the League of Nations, like the United Nations system, they adopted the collective security, which says that you don't have to worry for your own security. Your security concern is the concern for all of us. So the nations are given this assurance by the covenant, by the charter, which are constitutions, in a sense, which are constitutions of these world bodies. They are given assurance by the covenant of the League of Nations, by the charter of the United Nations organizations, that you don't have to worry for your own security. The security concern of a particular nation is the concern of all. Fine. This is great as far as theoretical position is concerned, but as I said, in real politics, in the turbulence of world politics, international politics, it is very difficult to maintain security collectively. That is why the race for arms could not be stopped. That is why every nation tried to procure arms, and all of them are trying to procure more and more arms. In fact, WMDs, weapons of mass destruction, WMD, weapons of mass destruction, they are also being procured today. Say North Korea, it has reportedly procured nuclear weapons. It has built nuclear weapons. So no country really can put exclusive faith on collective security. Now, the question is then why such a system was introduced by the Covenant of the League of Nations, by the Charter of the United Nations. Why, if this system cannot operate realistically, why this system was adopted? The answer would be because both the League of Nations and the United Nations, they were formed to maintain international peace and security. The very objective of the earlier League of Nations and now the United Nations, the very objective is to maintain international peace and security. That is why how best international peace and security could be maintained, how the international organization like the UN can assure its members that its security would be maintained, that is why they introduced this concept of collective security, although we must remember that side by side there are other systems, there are other efforts now being pursued by the United Nations for the maintenance of international peace and security. But collective security was one of the, initially it was one of the great attempts, I would say, to maintain international peace and security, although conflicting national interests, different divergent national interests pursued by each and every nation could not make this concept very successful. So the collective security system, let us be very clear without any ambiguity, that the collective security system did not really become successful. The collective security system was not effective during the Italo-Ethiopian War, as Morganthu has given this example, during the Korean War in 1950, as we have seen that the Korean crisis is lingering in the Korean Peninsula. North Korea and South Korea, they have divergent political interests, and countries supporting both, they also have conflicting political interests. When nations have conflicting interests, when nations have divergent political interests, it is very difficult for a collective security to be successful. Because in world politics, it is rather foolish to assume that all nations will have the same security concern, the same interests. Collective security was based on this lofty ideal that all nations would have same security concerns, would have more or less close national interests. But in world politics, they have conflicting interests, they have divergent interests, and that is why the collective security system could not really be defended. It could not really be operative.